Videos of mass protests earlier this week in Tehran, where tens of thousands of Iranian citizens gathered. What started as demonstrations in Iran among students and merchants over economic woes more than 2 weeks ago has escalated into nationwide rallies calling for the fall of the Islamic theocracy and its supreme leader, the Grand Ayatollah Khamenei. But those protests quickly turned deadly as government forces opened fire on unarmed protesters, leaving more than 2,500 people dead and thousands more arrested. Crisis in Iran. The crackdown on unrest is one of the deadliest there in more than a decade. And because of a widespread communications blackout, it's difficult to know just how devastating the crackdown is. But the protests show Iran's oppressive regime, one that has long crushed dissent and fueled terrorist proxies in the Middle East, is more fragile than ever. The few videos that are leaving the country show tense, quiet streets. Even if life in Tehran seems to return to normal, the U.S. continues to weigh military options against the government. The administration told Iranian officials there would be grave consequences if protesters continue to be killed, and placed heavy sanctions on Iranians it believed responsible for the crackdown. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and several Arab leaders have asked Trump to hold off on military action against Iran, but the White House says all options remain on the table. For more insights on the crisis in Iran, we are joined now by Alex Vatanka, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Born in Tehran, he specializes in Middle Eastern regional security affairs with a particular focus on Iran. Alex is also a senior fellow in Middle East Studies at the U.S. Air Force Special Operations School. Alex, thank you for being here. What do we know for certain about the violence being leveled against protesters in Iran?
Great to be with you. Look, number one, we've had about 5 big rounds of protests nationwide in Iran over the last decade. Every few years, people come out. Usually what the trigger is economic related. The price of a commodity goes up, or there is, in this case, a currency plummeted. But very quickly, the protesters go from chanting for, economic change to asking for a toppling of the regime. And that's really the story here. You've got a population that's had enough of 7 years now of Islamic Republic. They want a fundamental change. And the other thing about this latest round that really stands out is how bloody the operation to deal with the protesters were at the hands of the regime. They've literally killed thousands of their own people, mostly young people in their teens or 20s. And this really stands out from previous rounds. And you have to wonder if this regime can recover from this.
So just reiterating, this does differ from protests we've seen in the past in Iran. Alex, Trump has urged Iranians to keep protesting. Can you explain why it behooves the United States for these protests to continue? What do you think President Trump is hoping for here?
Look, President Trump has already kind of come out and said he wants to be on the winning side. And when he kind of stepped in at one point during last week, that looked like the protesters might just prevail, if you will, in that fight against the regime. But when the tide turned, the president's sort of messaging has changed. He's now saying that, as long as the regime doesn't execute some of these people arrested, then that's good enough for him. I think fundamentally the debate isn't over in the Trump administration. There's a fight inside the administration in terms of whether Iran is a foreign policy file that should be dealt as a strategic opportunity for the United States to look at this Iranian regime as the Soviet Union in its dying days, that it's on the brink. You just have to nudge it over the cliff, and then you will have a whole different Iran, one that could go back to what Iran was before 1979, a friend of the United States. Now, on the other side, the flip side, you have people saying this could end up being another endless war in the Middle East, and are urging the president to be very careful in terms of his next steps.
We'll be watching that debate within the administration closely then. Alex, you have written that the most effective U.S. tool at this moment is to keep Iran connected to the world and to raise the cost of repression. What do you mean by that, and how can that be carried out?
Look, when nobody's watching because they don't have access, when Iran is in darkness, those dark forces of the regime are getting away with the sort of murder that we've seen, or manslaughter of their own people. And if you put the lights back on to the extent possible, it might, you would hope, slow down at least the killing. Now, what can you do? Look at some of the things that folks like Elon Musk are doing, providing free access to internet through technologies like Starlink, enabling the 50,000 people who have the Starlink device inside Iran to freely communicate with the outside world. As these images, the footage of the massacre comes out, that surely will have an impact on the international community, and it surely will, tarnish the image of an Islamic Republic that already had a very tarnished image, but it just makes it that much more clear that this is a system that long time ago stopped working for its own people and is just fighting for its survival.
It's important to bring it all to the light here. Alex, considering Iran is an Islamic theocracy and fuses religious authority with political power, can you speak to how we're seeing that dynamic play out amid this crisis and these protests? And what does it mean for human rights that dissenters are framed as heretics?
So this is the irony. I mean, the Islamic Republic is born in 1979, 47 years ago. It's a theocracy. It's supposed to bring people to religion. But the hands of the Islamic Republic, they have turned people off religion. So today, Iran technically is a theocracy. In reality, is the most secular country in the Middle East. In fact, we saw in the protesters a number of mosques being burned. Clerics are regularly attacked in the streets. They need protection. People are angry not because of the religion as such, but because how religion has been abused by the political class in the Islamic Republic. If I was in the clerical class in Iran right now, and if I wanted to sort of give Islam any hope for existing in the future in this country of Iran, I would say let's get ourselves out of the business of politics as early as we can, because in this case, it really hasn't worked.
That's fascinating how you highlighted the secular culture that is there. Finally, Alex, what indicators are you monitoring that signal key regime insiders are ready to distance themselves from Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader?
I don't think for a moment that the majority of people in Iran want this regime. In fact, I would say 90% do not want it. And I would say of the 10% who are supporters of a regime, another 90% of that probably at this point is just in it because that's where the paycheck comes in. That doesn't mean they necessarily buy into the ideology anymore. So in other words, a lot of folks in Iran, including people inside this regime, are on the fence. They know this is starting to look like a sinking ship. They're looking for an opportunity out. And that becomes a challenge for the opposition in diaspora, the opposition to the extent that exists inside Iran, for countries like the United States, to think of ways to encourage and allow for the defections to happen. Because obviously, Supreme Leader Khamenei is not in the streets doing the killing himself. He needs foot soldiers. Get those foot soldiers to the extent that's possible, those without blood on their hands, off the scene, and then suddenly the 86-year-old Khamenei will be left alone, and I think the future of the regime would be seriously, in doubt.
Alex, thank you so much for your expertise during this ongoing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.